would have kept some of us away. We are now joining our YouTube stream. So I also want to welcome our virtual audience and those of you here to our first ever virtual research series of the St. Andrew's Theological College. So before I proceed with some very brief remarks, I want to acknowledge and welcome our moderator of the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago, the Right Reverend Joy Abdul Mohan, our General Secretary of Synod, Mr. Terence Ward, other members of Synod who may be here or joining us virtually, welcome. I also want to welcome our SATC Principal, Reverend Adrian Sieunarine, as well as immediate past principal of the St. Andrew's Theological College, Reverend Dr. Sama. Any ministers joining us here or online, welcome as well. And members of the board, I do see members of the board of directors of the St. Andrew's Theological College present. We have our corporate secretary, we have our treasurer, we have our board member, and those of us who are joining online again, welcome. I do want to pay a very, very special notice to our panelists today, our presenters. Thank you so much for giving of your time. And to our panel discussant, Mr. Dexter Rampersad, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your expertise this afternoon. To all students, well-wishers of the SATC, good afternoon. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Mirella Sambucharan, and I have the honor, which I just did, of welcoming you here this afternoon on behalf of the Board of Directors of the St. Andrew's Theological College. And today is a very exciting day, and as you can see on the screen on the next slide, this is a really big day for us here at St. Andrew's Theological College, because at the midway point in our term of office, we are very pleased to be in a position to showcase some of the research that has been taking place by members of our college community, well-wishers of our college, and other avid supporters of our esteemed institution. So as you see there on the previous slide, today is the first of a three-part series aimed at exploring topics of research related to the meaning and mission of Presbyterianism. So today we're going to flash back into our past through discussions, conversations, and we hope that today's research afternoon will set the tone for the two that will follow as we go on to consider our present status and look towards our future. So our focus, as you could see there, would be views from the past. And we have a highly qualified set of experts who will be delving into discussions as they relate to our church's history. And so the next slide shows the panelists, but you can see them right here as well. So they are by no means strangers to the Presbyterian community of Trinidad and Tobago. And I do want to welcome them all. Welcome Reverend Sieunarine, Mr. Partap, and Dr. Tilak Singh. Before I hand over to our panel chair this afternoon, I do want to thank our moderator, Reverend Joy Abdul Mohan. I see the pink is trending, Reverend Mohan, for your support in this venture and for all the support that you continue to show the Board of Directors of the St. Andrew's Theological College. Today, you're an honored guest, and we are very grateful for your presence as you launch this event. And on to our panel discussant, and I get to introduce him, and then I get to stop talking. So before I hand over to someone who is no stranger to our Presbyterian church community, I just want to say a few words about him. He is a self-proclaimed proud product of the Presbyterian school system, having gone to Tacarigua Presbyterian School, as well as Hillview College, and a little stint at Naparima College. Someone with a passion, not only for education and for ministry, Mr. Dexter Rampersad. And so for those of you who don't know Dexter, he has devoted his career to teaching to school administration and is presently in school supervision. His academic pursuits have led him to studies in history, political science, law, and of course, education. And so he is going to be quite a panel discussant, and I hope our presenters are ready for the questions he will be asking. As a lover of challenges, Dexter also pursued postgraduate studies in educational leadership, philosophy, and ultimately theology. When asked what he was most proud of as a member of the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago, he indicated that his pride resides in the fact that he considers himself a friend of the church. He is known to boast to many, including myself, that he has been blessed to be present at almost every pulpit in Trinidad and Tobago, in every Presbyterian church. Just think there's a few you didn't get to go to. So those churches will certainly invite him now. If you haven't seen him, you're seeing him there on the slide. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand you over to our panel discussant for day one of our research series, Mr. Dexter Rampersad, who will guide us through the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sambucharan, and please permit me to say all protocols observed. I know that Ms. Sambucharan would have given us the long list of dignitaries who are present here. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I was wondering who she was speaking about. I looked at the photo and I didn't recognize myself. It's a very young photo. Friends, it is wonderful indeed that you can join with the St. Andrew's Theological College, reputed as being the oldest tertiary institution in Trinidad and Tobago. And those of you comprising the live audience and those of you who would be joining us virtually, poetry reminds us the way you remember the past is the catalyst of hope for the future. So today, to lead us in an opening prayer and officially launch the St. Andrew's Theological College first ever virtual research series is a woman who needs no introduction. Minister, former principal of the St. Andrew's Theological College, former senator, recipient in 2021 of the National Award, the Gold Medal for the Development of Women, present moderator of the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago. It is indeed an honor to call upon the Right Reverend Joy Abdul Mohan.
Very much, panel chair, for this first ever virtual research series of SATC. Can I invite us to stand, those of us here in the chapel, and even those who are joining us virtually, you are free to stand with us as well. Let us come to God in prayer. Let us pray. Almighty and eternal creator of our lives, caretaker and sustainer of our souls, out of the restlessness and turbulence of this world, we set aside this time to recognize your blessings and to give thanks for this initiative and launching ceremony of the first ever virtual research series hosted by our cherished St. Andrew's Theological College, SATC. You, O God, are the source of all wisdom and knowledge, and you are the giver of truth. You have given us minds with which to think, and you have enriched our lives with many gifts and talents. We thank you, O God, for all those who have had the vision to initiate this series in virtual research. Officers and members of the board of directors, our principal, faculty, and staff of SATC. May you bless them for their hard work and sacrificial labor as they continue to make the vision and mission of SATC a lived reality in the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago, our country, our community, and in the lives of those who engage in theological education and formation. Oh God, a special blessing and anointing, we pray, upon all panel chairs and panelists as they take us on a journey with views from the past, vividness of the present, and visions of the future, with the aim to have a better understanding of the meaning and mission of Presbyterianism in Trinidad and Tobago. Grant, O Lord, that what we now do in your name may be to your honor and to your glory, For it is in your Son's name, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, we offer this prayer. Amen. Please be seated. And so just before I do the official launch, I was asked to just offer some brief remarks, and those who perhaps know me, I can be sisters with the chair of the board, Marilla. We love talking. Nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to share some brief remarks at this historical and groundbreaking event in the life of SATC. However, it is with profound admiration and optimism that I commend the board of directors, the officers, our principal, for initiating this first ever virtual research series. And as I stand here, a host of memories cascade my mind when I pursued a UWI course many years ago in the poetics and politics of research, ethnography, when I learned much more about qualitative research, which involved immersing myself in a particular community or organization to observe their particular behavior and interactions up close. So this is very special to me as well, and I commend SATC for this initiative. Today, therefore, should remind us of how important a virtual research environment or online research system is for today's world. The ability to easily share information and research results is invaluable, especially when we learn of the rich and noble heritage of the Presbyterian Church and many other current various issues with views from the past, vividness of the present, and visions of the future. Not too sure who coined these statements, but I love them. I commend you for them. Congrats to SATC and the board of directors, our principal, and all those who would lead us through a lovely and wonderful journey of faith, especially our esteemed panelists today, and best wishes for a successful series. I now declare that the first ever virtual series launched today, and as we walk through this journey, may God bless us, and may we indeed learn more about life itself, but about Presbyterianism. A round of applause for those who, God bless you, and I thank you.
Thank you to our moderator for declaring the launch, the official opening of our first ever virtual research series here at the St. Andrew's Theological College. You know what the poet says, let us remember the past with gratitude, the present with enthusiasm, and look forward to the future with confidence. As you all would have heard, and I'm going to keep reiterating, this virtual research series has a three-part component spanning 3 days. The meaning and mission of Presbyterianism in Trinidad and Tobago, past, present, and future. Today we are going to focus on views from the past with knowledgeable, dynamic, energetic, compelling, magnetic, charismatic speakers. Did I leave out any adjectives you all told me to use? No, got them? I got them all. We are going to have presentations from the panelists, followed by a roundtable discussion with a question and answer opportunity. We encourage our virtual audience to send your questions via the YouTube chat. And we encourage the live audience that you can send your questions via the Me and You chat. You raise your hands and you will come up and ask your burning questions. Because the purpose of this, we truly want to ignite deep conversation through your reflection and your introspection, sparked by the presentations of the panelists, as we aim to reimagine and re-envision ourselves as a community of learners here at the St. Andrew's Theological College. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker, and we're going to do it like a little Jeopardy rounds. You will guess if you can figure out who this person is. He has been a pupil at not 1 or 2, but 5 primary schools: Kunaripo, Guayco, Curep, Tunapuna, and Tacarigua Presbyterian schools. Having settled down in his behavior, he proceeded to high school, St. Mary's College, at which he was valedictorian, and then attended universities in not one or two, but 5 countries: Trinidad, Canada, the USA, Israel, and England. Settling down again, he embarked on not 1 or 2, but 5 vocations in the church, as well as having touched at law, government, commerce, and education. Makes you wonder what is it with the number 5 there. Among the awards he has received are several scholarships and Enterprise Teacher Awards in England, and the gold medal for first place at Knox College, University of Toronto. He has taught at the primary, the secondary, and tertiary levels. He's a barrister of England and Wales and an attorney of Trinidad and Tobago. Presently, he is the principal of the St. Andrew's Theological College of our Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago. So without further ado, we warmly welcome Reverend Adrian Sieunarine, our school's principal, as he presents to you, he speaks to us about Christian villages.
The fivefold thing, it's interesting. And some of you would know that the Hindi word for 5 is panch, from which we get things like punch, as in rum punch, and punchon. So I'm not sure if that's particularly symbolic or coincidental. And today I'm going to talk to you briefly about Christian Village. It's a real place. And I need to set this in context. This came about from research that I did, and research that's located at the University of the West Indies in 1988. The reason I mention the year is that we give God thanks for those who have gone before us, and particularly for our elders, because I interviewed 10 people in 1988. Many of them were in their 80s, one was in their 90s. All of them are no longer with us. And I interviewed them because Christian Village is an interesting and a unique settlement in Trinidad and Tobago. In the closing years of the 19th century, Christian Village was born. The first settler was an East Indian called Bikram, who got the first and largest parcel of land somewhere between 1880 and 1890. And as was common in Trinidad at the time, for a while the area was known as Bikram Village. Morton Class, in a book called East Indians in Trinidad, A Study in Cultural Persistence, noted a similar trend in a village called Amity. He called it Amity, which for a while was known as Bihari's settlement. Bikram was joined afterwards by some other families, Mukram, Bisnath, and Jagdeo, and they formed the nucleus of that village. And at the time when I explored and examined and studied the village, there were about 65 households there with a combined population of about 250 people, located on Calcutta Road number 1 and Lime Fruit Road near Freeport. But when these first 4 families settled these areas, forming a village, they built carat houses, C-A-R-A-T. These were typical houses of the indentureship era, wooden and dirt structures over the bare earth with a ceiling of carrot leaves. The total floor area of their house was about 5 by 4 meters. Those of you who were acquainted with the older system and need some translation, that's about 15 by 12 feet. And there were several interesting things that happened when the village started, several factors that influenced the shape of the village. Grants after indentureship, shopkeepers, missionaries, and family forces. People got grants of land after indentureship and purchased land, but very often shopkeepers, who were the people who were the money lenders at the time, they had an unusual role where sometimes during indentureship, people would be paid not with money, but with something that was called a shop paper. Very often, shopkeepers, sometimes in collusion with landowners, would promote alcoholism. And people would be encouraged to go and get alcohol, which they couldn't buy with money, but they would use this shop paper that linked them to that shop. Soon they would discover that they were not only alcoholic, they were also indebted. No problem. The shop would take their land. And in exchange for the purchase orders redeemed only at the local shops. And here I was grateful for records of this also in Susan Craig's book, Smiles and Blood, and other books that recorded this practice. Sometimes when people couldn't pay, they could get the commodities they wanted with a 20 to 25% interest markup, since they weren't paying cash. They only had this shop paper. And sometimes the shopkeepers would charge them more. Very often then, after indentureship, people sometimes discovered they had lost their land even before they got it. They had lost it to the shopkeepers. So after the bond period was over, therefore they were no longer entitled to their return passage, and they had lost the land. They were indebted to the shopkeeper, the money lender. So they had to choose the option for land grant. And that land grant went immediately into the clutches of the moneylenders, leaving the ex-indentured laborers totally penniless and landless in this new country of Trinidad and Tobago. However, in Christian Village, the Canadian missionaries intervened, often purchasing the land from the moneylenders, establishing educational institutions, fervently promoting a culture of abstinence. And in the Presbyterian Church in Trinidad and Tobago, to this day, you cannot serve alcohol on property owned by the Presbyterian Church in Trinidad and Tobago. So those of you present in person today, we have refreshments, but no alcohol. You are forbidden to serve alcohol on any Presbyterian property. This dates from the missionary era and their very fervent promotion of total abstinence. And sometimes the missionaries rescued villagers from the clutches of the moneylenders. They paid for the parcels of land, and sometimes they would sell to the villagers at a very low rate. And in some cases, they would even tell them, listen, you come to church for a while and we'll work something out. The missionaries were often engaged in selling the land in a measurement that we no longer use anymore. It comes from an old patois word from the French. It was called a carré, or in the French, C-A-R-R-E, with an accent, and it was a unit used for measuring land. It was something like an acre. And there were two basic units of land, a carré, which was like an acre, and a purchase, which was bigger. That was the large unit in which crown lands were sold at the time. And then another factor involved in land settlement, redistribution, family forces. One researcher refers to family forces as crab antics because of crabs in a barrel. And that involved all kinds of techniques and strategies and things that happened at marriage, conveyances to children, activities between brothers and sisters. And in a work that is published by Yale University Press, where Peter Wilson depicts and describes this practice, he refers to crab antics, the social anthropology of English-speaking Negro societies of the Caribbean, Yale University Press. He talks about how crab antics refers to the maneuvering for personal acquisition of the land. This occurs in all societies in the Caribbean. And it refers to the fragmentation of land that then eventually occurs. So land is used for some individual subsistence. It's sold, it's used for settlement. And Christian Village became an area where the Presbyterian Church was the church, and all the settlements radiated out from the Presbyterian Church because of the influence of the missionaries and then the local elders and catechists and church leaders. Morton Klass, in his book that I've referred to, has an interesting description of Presbyterians. He said most villagers take it for granted that they are insincere Christians, but they do not look down on them for that. That's a quote from Morton Klass. They don't look down on them for that because they admire them. They say, no, these people adopted a religion in order for them to advance socially and economically and educationally. The first converts to Presbyterianism in many communities did so to get placed as teachers in the Canadian mission schools. However, in Christian Village, there's no Canadian mission school. There's no Presbyterian school. The closest school is a few kilometers away in Upper Caripichaima. So people I interviewed said, quote, I am a Christian. I love God and I was baptized a Presbyterian. My parents were Presbyterians and I will be to the end a Presbyterian. This is something that some researchers call a pure religiosity. In other words, their faith, whatever may have been the faith of their parents and grandparents, their faith was genuine. In Christian Village, they named the church Grace, or in the Hindi language, Anugrah. At the time when I studied this area, the minister of the pastoral region was the father of one of our panelists, the esteemed Reverend Daniel Tilak Singh. And at the time when I studied Christian Village, at every church service, they would sing a bhajan, a hymn in Hindi. And that was an outward and a visible sign and a vocal connection to their past. There were few people who would still bring the Hindi songbook, the Geet Mala, to church. There were prayer meetings that would be held at people's homes for all kinds of events. Engagements, Thanksgivings, memorials, a regular prayer meeting that was an annual Thanksgiving every year. Sometimes for recovery for an illness. Sometimes a change in residence. And at the time when I studied this area, all the prayer meetings were officiated by Reverend Daniel Tilak Singh. They were also a means of establishing a common identity, and they were an integral part of religion in that society, in that community, and everybody, whatever their religion, would attend the prayer meeting. One other thing I want to mention was an interesting change that I learned about in marriage patterns. And I'll conclude with this. When East Indian immigrants came from India, they tried to replicate Indian patterns. One of them spectacularly did not work, and that was the practice of giving a dowry. Because women were scarce. So in Christian Village, people remembered, people would come and say, we want to marry this girl. What dowry will you give us for that? And the girl would say, excuse me, there are very few girls in this village. I am the nicest one. What are you giving me in order to marry me? And I was able to chronicle the development of the replacement of the dowry system, which they tried to bring from India, with a bride price. A bride price. You had to pay the woman for the privilege of marrying her. So that led to a new kind of feminism, because the woman was able to say, and also, I can't and won't stay in any marriage I'm not happy with, because somebody else will be willing to pay for me. So let's make sure you keep on keeping on. And the last thing I'll mention, there were Jahaji relationships. People whose grandparents had come over on the same boat. They would not be related by blood, but they'd be related by boat. And therefore, their children and grandchildren wouldn't marry each other. They would consider each other relatives. Jahaji Bai. So that was some work I did on Christian Village in 1988. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present it to you. God bless you.
Thank you indeed, our own Reverend Adrian Sieunarine, our principal of the St. Andrew's Theological College. Bride price. Now I know why I am still single. So indeed, Reverend Sieunarine, we want to thank you for igniting our imagination, taking us down memory lane, looking at that topic of Christian Village, a term that's sometimes loosely used without realizing its foundational aspect in the history of our Presbyterian Church. So we thank you indeed. Friends, we continue to move on. As they like to say, we're moving with speed now. Our second speaker. This gentleman did not attend as many primary schools as our previous speaker. But he is indeed a trained teacher with a BSc in sociology at the University of the West Indies. He was a primary school teacher from the years 1956 to 76, journalist, editor, columnist for the Trinidad Express, 1976 to 1995. A former, I think this one will give it away, former cabinet minister of labor and cooperatives, 1995 to 2001. Former member of parliament for Nariva, 1995 to 2004. Komoto Manzanilla, 2004 to 2010. High Commissioner to South Africa, 2010 to 2015. He is presently an elder of the St. James Presbyterian Church in Tableland. He has authored 2 books, Kamala Defining Moment in 2020, a political text, and his second, A Sermon in Faith, the historical journey of the St. James Presbyterian Church in Tableland, written in 2022. So we would like to welcome very warmly Mr. Harry Partap to speak on vignettes of local churches.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our small churches, tucked away in once remote villages, very often have a good story to tell. But those stories are locked away in the memory of older folks who had participated in or knew people who participated in the building of those church communities. Don't for one moment underestimate these ordinary common folks. They were perhaps pedestrian in thought, but solid in recalling such events. They were the real pioneers of our rural Presbyterian foundation. They did the manual work. They soiled their hands. They organized and mobilized. They argued in support of the new experience, and they even managed the frustrations in convincing the skeptical. They were, as Dr. Jerome Tuluxing rightly described, as the missionaries' right hand. Some of them could not read nor write, but their passion, commitment, and strong faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, nurtured by the Canadian missionaries, are revealed in the stories they tell. It was good news to them, and they shared it with others. One of those rural churches was the St. James Presbyterian Church in Tabland, as distinct from the St. James in North Trinidad. My friends, 138 years ago, when the foundation was gathering strength, Tabland was in the backwoods and backwaters of South Trinidad. It was set in thick forests, swampy valleys, stable ridges, but very rich soil. The colonial government at the time offered the land for sale at 1 shilling per acre. Several East Indian indentured laborers who had opted to remain in the colony after serving their indentureship bought large tracts of these lands, converting them into profitable cocoa and coffee estates. Some of these recently freed East Indian immigrants moved into Tabland from the cane fields of Mount Stewart, Malgratut, and areas surrounding Princestown to set up residence on these estates. They had already been working with the Reverend Dr. John Morton in Irie Village and had urged him to extend the Presbyterian influence eastward. My interest in researching the historical journey of the St. James Presbyterian Church began 50 years ago during the 50th anniversary celebrations of the church. 3 elderly gentlemen, Sohan Das, J.N. Ramsahai, and Ralph Hosier, spoke of the challenges faced by a small band of believers in building a place to worship as a community. And I emphasize community because it was the community that came together to build the church and the schools in Tabland. It was hard. It was difficult. They had no power tools. Their main means of transport was animal-drawn carts. The roads were narrow and unpaved. They had limited financial resources. Ralph Hosier's recollection was indeed fascinating, being the son of the catechist Thomas Ali Hussein. That's, I think, Reverend Abdul Mohan's relative. Good, right. And he spearheaded the building of that project, that church, in 1922. His granddaughter, Donna Latif, reflected on his work, which is at chapter 4 in the book. My friends, the information gathered from these 3 elderly gentlemen were invaluable. Here, a church was established in humble conditions. It eventually blossomed into a church community, supporting 2 primary schools. It expanded to 3 preaching stations, physically constructed 2 church buildings. One stood for 66 years, and the other completing now 34 years this year. This small rural community, influenced by the St. James Presbyterian Church, with its 2 primary schools, gave to the country leaders at the national level. This church community produced 2 government ministers, a high commissioner, a speaker of the House of Representatives, 1 member of the then Legislative Council, 3 members of the House of Representatives, an internationally renowned entomologist, 2 trade union leaders, lawyers, engineers, medical doctors, scores of principals, teachers, and educators, electricians, masons, carpenters, among others. A church community with this kind of secular profile required more than passing reference. My friends, the quest for more information started. But the information was not easily available either at the library or our archive, for the simple reason that in rural churches, local officials believe that those documents, correspondences, minutes, annual reports, etc., were their personal belongings. They are not. They belong to the church. So the search began for all documents related to our local church at St. James, and by extension, the Tableland Pastoral Region. Some were retrieved and assisted in verifying the historical record that found its way in the book. However, information on the 2 primary schools were gleaned from oral history and documents that were in the hands of past students. And this was so because, unfortunately, all, and I mean all, admission books, attendance registers, logbooks, circulars, and documents dating back to when both the Elswick and the Nepal Presbyterian schools were established in 1884 and 1911, respectively, had been consigned to flames in a massive spring cleaning by officials of these schools in the 1980s. What a travesty that all these historical documents were burnt and permanently destroyed in the name of spring cleaning. Permit me now to read 2 short extracts from the book, A Sermon in Faith, a historical journey of the St. James Presbyterian Church in Tableland. The first one comes from chapter 2, page 16, and it deals with the construction of the first church in 1922. Please note that the first church building was constructed 38 years after the church community was formed in 1884. And the second reading comes from chapter 9, page 84, dealing with the construction of the second church in 1988. We listen now to the first reading, chapter 2, page 16, and quote. Ralph Hosier recalled that the church building project involved the hewing of trees for lumber and hand sawing them into the required board sizes. Hand sawing was time-consuming, tedious, and laborious work. And I'll just pause a while to explain what hand sawing meant. Hand sawing was, there was this long saw, a long saw with 2 handles, and in those days, one man will hold one end and the other fellow hold the other end, and they'll be moving the saw along, and there was a third fellow who will be putting a stake between so that the saw wouldn't stick to the wood. That was laborious work. He said his father had assisted in the actual sawing of the boards for the church. When the original church was demolished in the 1980s, Hosier retrieved as a keepsake a wooden pillar with his father's initial painted TAH. The second reading, chapter 9, page 84, and quote, Now that the steel structure, this was in 1988, now that the steel structure and foundation had been completed, there were other tasks to be done, but the helping hands had somewhat disappeared. The project was now facing further delays because skilled help could not be found to lay the bricks for the walls, the plastering, installing windows and doors, as well as the myriads of other activities to complete a building. It was at this point that Dave Puntai and his father, Nandanlal Puntai, took up the challenge to complete the building. Dave and his father, they had experience in construction work. And he was the driving force behind the project. He devoted many valuable hours seeking financial support for the project and supervising the construction. Unquote. My friends, that was the history. That was the history. Now the challenge is to locate some of these elderly folks in our churches and record that oral history of our early church for posterity. I want to say that all the research material used in the preparation of the book will be given to the Presbyterian archive shortly. And if you will permit me a bit of advertisement, the book is available at the Irie Book Center here at $150 per copy, and $50 from the cover price will be donated to the Presbyterian archive. Thank you so much. Yes, yeah. Okay. Thank you for your patience and your time.
Indeed, Mr. Partap, I am sure we can do better for both our second speaker and our previous presenter. And you know, while he's speaking, we realize that his words would also seem to describe the inception of so many of our churches when we do some research into the rich history, the foundation and the beginning of so many of our foundation churches of our Presbyterian faith. So we do thank you, Mr. Partap, and we thank you for that little ad as well. And for our virtual audiences, I am sure if you all contact the Theological College, they will ensure that copies can be made available to you all as well. Because remembering the past, it should help you to create a purposeful future. I don't need to ask you to guess who our third presenter will be. He is very, very modest in his biodata, we have realized. Dr. Jerome Tiloksing is presently employed at the University of the West Indies at St. Augustine. He has published chapters and journal articles on various aspects of Caribbean history. He visited archives in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick in Canada to conduct research on the work of the Canadian missionaries. Dr. Tiloksing has published 2 books relating to the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago, The Missionaries' Right Hand, and secondly, my favorite title, Caribbean-Flavored Presbyterianism, Education as a Prescription for Socio-Political Development, 1868 to 2008. Today, Dr. Tiloksing will be presenting for us on the missionaries. Dr. Tiloksing.
Thank you very much, Dexter. I ask you, where would you be today if the Canadian mission had never come to Trinidad? Think about it. No catechists, no missionaries, no Canadian mission schools, no CMI schools. There would be a void in our country's education. And these Canadian missionaries, you are familiar with their names: John Morton, Thomas Christie, Kenneth Grant, John MacLeod. And they were assisted by Bible women, catechists, elders, pupil teachers, headmasters, all working to improve the life of the East Indian, the Afro-Trinidadians, everyone in Trinidad and Tobago. They served in different capacities: missionaries, counselors, humanitarians, philanthropists. They were genuinely interested in improving the lives of the citizens of not just this colony, Trinidad, during the colonial era, but across the Caribbean. And many times we see the history, we glorify their work, their legacy, but we often don't understand their sacrifices to uproot themselves from their homeland, to come to a new country, and to face tropical diseases like typhoid, malaria, smallpox. All these diseases and ailments took a toll, and some of the American missionaries in Irie had died because of these diseases and sicknesses. And many of us would be familiar with the book John Morton of Trinidad, edited by his wife, and I have read that book many times. And I want to tell you that being a missionary in a foreign land is not an easy job. And being a missionary in a land where their culture, their custom, their religion is different makes it an even more difficult task. And I have realized that these missionaries knew their Bible inside out. They would meet the holy men from the Hindu faith, the Brahmins, the Pandits, and they would have arguments with them. Remember, they are dealing with one group dealing with reincarnation and karma, and another group telling them about the love of Jesus Christ and about heaven. And some of these missionaries talked about the bitter opposition they faced, especially amongst the Muslims who rejected any message that undermined the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. So I want you to understand that it was no easy task. The conversion rate was very low. But they stayed here in this colony. They stayed throughout the Caribbean, British Guyana, Grenada, St. Lucia, Jamaica, because they wanted to help the people. We all know about the schools. We all know about education. But these people served a very important role. They stopped fights. They counseled people. Remember, we are living in an era without psychologists and psychiatrists. You know what they also did, which many people don't know? They brought medicine from Canada for these people. Remember, we are living in an era where the medical system was not as good as it is today. So these people, they are serving as doctors, they are serving as mediators. Today we'd call them justice of the peace. So they played a very important role. They played a very important role. I know Reverend Sieunarine talked about feminism. They helped uplift the East Indian woman. They had special homes and orphanages. They taught these women, how to improve themselves. They taught them sewing, knitting, how to be a good wife. So they played an extremely important role amongst men and women, amongst the girls. And in all the fields that I have studied, the Princestown field, San Fernando field, the Guayco field, the Couva field, these missionaries never gave up. There was a sort of bravery, a sort of persistence, a sort of confidence. And it had to be the Holy Spirit guiding them. It had to be something different that was motivating these people amidst all these failures and all these challenges. And it is something when you read, it will inspire you. And Mr. Partap drew reference to the transport, horse and buggy, the mules, the carts, wagons, muddy roads traveling through forests, often looking for indentured laborers who were hiding and didn't want to hear the word of God, looking amongst the cane fields for children who didn't want to go to the same schools. So it was no easy task. Here it is. They faced these challenges headlong. And I want to draw a reference to something that made me pause one night whilst I was reading John Morton of Trinidad. 1881, at Orange Grove in North Trinidad, Sarah Morton reports on hard-faced women. She was preaching the gospel too. And she said these hard-faced women began to weep when they saw Christ, that picture of the crucifixion of Christ and about the love of Jesus. And it made me realize, that here is this missionary documenting the power of that gospel to change lives. Now, for many years, I have been a defender of the missionaries. Researchers and scholars and academics have criticized the missionaries. They have questioned the missionaries' motives. Some have said that these missionaries had an alliance with the planters and the colonial government. It was only obvious. If you want to deal with the Indians, you had to have a good relationship with the planters. If you want funding for your schools, you have to have a good relationship with the governor and the inspector of schools. So I want to question those who challenge that relationship and friendship with the colonial authorities, because it was the colonial authorities who helped with the teacher's salary. The Foreign Mission Board could only do so much from Canada, but the locals also had to contribute. And I want to also challenge something that many people have said. They have said that the Canadian missionaries contributed to racial polarization. They have said that we have kept Indo-Trinidadians and Afro-Trinidadians apart. And that is very, very untrue. That was not their agenda. How could that be the agenda for Christian men and women? The Afro-Trinidadians and the rest of the population, they had ward schools, government schools, the EC schools, the Anglican schools, the Roman Catholic schools. The missionaries came down here, John Morton came down here and saw the Indian children abandoned and neglected and marginalized. So I want you to remember that anyone who wants to criticize the Canadian missionaries, they have to come better than that. I want to warn the Presbyterians today. I want to warn you, and I want you to listen to me well. We are going through a change in the 21st century where people they want to change the names of streets. They want to pull down statues. You know who they'll come after? They might come after the Canadian missionaries. They will want to say, you know what? I don't think we should have that Canadian missionary name in your school, So I want you to be very careful that you cherish and preserve and guard that legacy of those missionaries. I want to tell you something that is very important, and is very, very important for us to understand the 21st century. And it's a lesson for us. On the 75th anniversary of the Canadian mission in 1943, there was a report, and I quote, "The Bible is a textbook for the first hour of the day, and instruction is given in righteousness and morality." End of quote. So you see, the Bible was the regular feature, not just in the Sabbath and the Sunday services, not just in Irie Home in Princestown, but it played a central and major role. In fact, some of the older children were invited to sign a pledge to abstain from drinking alcohol. So our Presbyterian Church has set a high standards for life in our country. We had strict ethical and moral codes. We condemn the use of alcohol, smoking, indulgence in any forms of gambling. You know what the Presbyterian Church had in the early years? Something called Temperance Sunday, in which they would focus on the dangers of alcohol. You know what Sarah Morton wrote in March 1882? She talked about a law in which rum shops and other shops would be closed at 9 o'clock on mornings. That is when the Sabbath was to be kept holy. And she was very happy to see that law pass. We no longer have that law. And I want to tell you something, that the missionaries' presence, their role, it was a two-pronged approach, evangelism and education. Reverend Nehall said it was like a man riding a bicycle with two wheels. Education was one wheel and evangelism. And this is what we should see our mission in the past as doing. Presbyterians have to return to that evangelism. I have been to many churches, and I have seen small and medium-sized churches with small attendances. It is now for us to return to that evangelism. But I don't want you to go and convert strangers, you know. I want you to go after some of those backsliders in our church. Some of those Presbyterians who might just want to come out on a communion Sunday, maybe just Easter or Christmas. Those are the people I want you to do your evangelism to. Some of us might know about the Jehovah's Witnesses who come around our homes, giving their booklets and wanting to preach the gospel. We see them well-dressed with the umbrellas. I want to challenge the Presbyterians to also go and distribute your literature. And you have these publications from the Theological College. You have your monthly TP. I want you all to go after you finish reading it and distribute it to people at work. Give it to a neighbor. We have to return to the basic form of evangelism. You have the literature. You don't have to start printing it. So this is what I want us to learn from the missionaries. They did a lot of walking, you know. I talked about the mule cart and the wagons and the buggies. They did hundreds of miles by foot every year. We, in 2022, have so much technology and so many vehicles, and we have to start going back to the evangelism of that late 19th and early 20th century. I want to give a challenge to the church. I know you all have 2 more sessions, and maybe you all could deal with it in those 2 sessions, and that is the challenge of the PCTT is not to build a hospital. We have plenty hospitals. It's not to build schools. We have too many schools. What I want you all to do is to think about how we could deal with the social problems of Trinidad and Tobago. What solutions do we have for the social problems, such as crime and unemployment and vagrancy, gender-based violence, murders? I also want you to be challenged to strengthen and build and expand your bases. I don't even want to talk about Tobago. I would have loved to see a church in Tobago. And I hope that this could be dealt with in one of the future sessions. I also want to say something that could be done, and that is, we have a home for the aged, the elderly in South Trinidad, San Fernando, not far from here, J.C. McDonald Home. Why can't we build a home for the elderly in Central and North Trinidad, or maybe Tobago? And I want to warn you all to take care of the church property. I spent my early years in a church manse near the Akashbani Church in Siparia. And about 20 years ago, when I went there, I was so hurt and saddened to see that manse. And last year, my daughter said, Daddy, I want to see where you grew up. I don't know, maybe I should carry a Tunapuna because I spent some early years in Tunapuna manse too. I have seen the Prince's Town manse demolished, and a bank has replaced that manse. We have to cherish our church properties. When I was smaller, there was a manse opposite Balmain Church. That manse is no longer there. I want us to prevent our manses, our church properties, from becoming dilapidated and demolished. I want us to be careful with our church lands and not to be so quick to sell our lands. That is our legacy that has been passed on from those Canadian missionaries. I also want to commend the church for reaching out to those Venezuelan migrants who have been coming to Trinidad. This is one of the ways in which you are spreading the mission, and this is what the Canadian missionaries would have done if they were here. So I want to commend the church, doing a very good work in helping these immigrants who are fleeing their country. In closing, I want to thank you all for inviting me here, and I am very honored to be part of this panel. Thank you all.
Thank you for that very passionate presentation indeed. And you would realize that our presenters or speakers, they have echoed to you, as Dr. T. Loxing said, that need for evangelism. He spoke about that need of, as the missionaries did, walking all those miles, using the horse-drawn buggy. With the price of fuel, have no fear, we might soon be heading that way very soon. So friends, at this point, you have heard from our three presenters. So we are about to be engaging in our panel discussion. So we want to remind you all that you can submit virtually, you can submit your questions via the YouTube chat. We are hoping that those questions will come in fast and furious. As you can see, our presenters, they're ready and raring to hit that ring. Just remember that to understand the living present and the promise of the future, you must remember the past, where we have come from. Many people like to use that expression, you know, you don't go forward by looking through the back windshield. But it is by knowing where we came from, we can continue to promote our Presbyterian church as a truly strong, formidable foundation of faith and our family of faith. Amen? Amen, indeed. Starting to preach now. So, as we are looking toward the questions starting to come in, did the presenters have a little drink of water, the vocal cords all lubricated? Ms. Sambucharan told me when I was given the little 5-day work to do this, you know, she told me that I could go out of the box with my questions to the panel, a decision which she quickly regretted but was too late to pull back. So Dr. T. Loxing, as we are waiting for questions to start to come in, as I want to warm it up for our live audience to feel a little more comfortable to come forward. We know there are three very, you know, dashing, debonair young men, but you all can come forward and speak to them, bring your questions. So Dr. T. Loxing, maybe I want to ask you this one. You know, you've spoken about the impact of the missionaries, the dedication, and what they would have done. I have heard sometimes in different quarters, different debates, people speak about Reverend Morton visiting in 1864, I believe it was at first, and then returning in 1868. And with all of the positives that we have seen emanating from this, yet there's this school of thought that Reverend John Morton just came to Trinidad for his health. And everything else, you know, it just happened off the cuff. Can you maybe give us some clarity, a little touch from your historical knowledge on this?
Yes, you are correct. He did come down. He was advised by his doctor to come to a warm colony. I believe he had a throat infection. And he was healed. So it was a sort of a coincidence, an act of God for him to be here. But whilst he was down here, he witnessed the conditions of the East Indian children and their parents in the colony in particular, right? And he felt that there was this need to come down and spread the word, but to also help these people physically.
Truly indeed. Thank you for that. I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to add.
I just want to add one thing, and that is one of the lines that John Morton used when he spoke to his church in Canada. He said it would be a stain on our Christianity if we didn't do something. And basically they said, well, we don't know what to do, but if you want to go with your sick self and take your young children there, your young child and your wife, and he did. To their amazement, he did. And even the Americans didn't believe he would have any success because they said, well, you know, we had big, strong Americans there and they all got sick and died. But if you want the little piece of land that nobody's doing anything with in Irie, you could have it. And I think that's how he ended up coming to Irie Village and beginning there.
Thank you very much for that, Reverend Sieunarine and Dr. Tiloxing. Indeed, many times we don't realize the way divine intervention may operate in the lives of others and the impact that can have not just on one or two individuals, but an entire nation in moving it forward and in giving us the rich legacy that we have been able to inherit and own as proud Presbyterians, as we like to say. I would like to open the floor to any of our live audience here. If there are any questions, as we like to say in school, there is no question like a silly question. We have one hand up. I don't know if we have a mic for the... yes.
Thank you. Thank you most kindly. I am delighted, of course, to be here at St. Andrew's Theological College and to be in such distinguished company. Harry, my friend from way back when, Jerome in the 90s, you and I would have been MPhil PhD students at UWI. I listened to your presentation, I think, earlier in the year, prior to December. I was due in January, and then a fire struck, and that was it. So the question really travels through all that you have spoken about. That is to say, the village, Christian village, the emergence of that church, St. James in Tableland, and the missionaries. Because I don't know we could describe Trinidad as being a plural society in the sense that we use now. But certainly you would have had Afro, you would have had the planter class, Euros generally, and you have a new group of people after 1845 setting up in Trinidad under the indenture system. Now, I'm just saying that because when I went to the church on not Harris Promenade, but Grant Memorial, back in the days, I was shocked out of my boots, literally, when I saw Reverend Kramer. Because I didn't think I'd see, but I don't know if I mislabeled him, but I'm just giving it as it is, right? I saw this Afro-looking gentleman because I was doing things in the society, and I saw Kramer. And then when I went to Teachers Training College, there was Sherman Miller, as Afro as can be, teaching in a school up in the back of Williamsville on a hill. Brothers Presbyterian. So I want to know if you could just say a little bit about, I don't know if it's integration, it couldn't be exclusive only to Indo, or what happened in terms of the relationship between others, whoever they are, Afro and so on, and the Presbyterians and Indo in terms of the Christian village, St. James in Tableland, which I guess is not strictly Indo only, and the missionaries, if they confine themselves solely and so on within the ambit of pursuing Indo-Trinidadians to become Christianized. Yeah? Thank you.
Dr. Tiloxing said he is going to culminate that discussion. First of all, I want to thank Major Bridgewater. We are privileged at the SATC to have Major Bridgewater with us, a very, very gifted and very well appreciated historian and someone who's also very well respected in his field of endeavor, both in his work and also as someone who is on the Committee for National Emblems. So he is someone who is very well cherished in many aspects of life in Trinidad and Tobago, and a brilliant historian. And one of the things I would begin by saying is to follow from what Dr. Tiloxing said, and that is the missionaries never excluded. They observed that there were people who were marginalized and excluded. And therefore, a mission had to be targeted to them because no one else had a mission of evangelism and education that was designed for the people who had been brought from India, who had a different language. However, When they built schools, anyone could attend the school. When they built churches, anyone could attend the church. And this process and this pattern continues to this day, where many of our churches, although because of historical factors, they would have largely an East Indian congregation, it wouldn't be exclusively East Indian, and we'd have people of any other group, any other ethnicity who would join that church. And I'm glad you referred to Reverend Kramer, who is someone who is deeply loved, always one of our most popular ministers, and someone we're very grateful to have with his optimism and his happiness and his sense of joy in serving the Lord. And he joined the Presbyterian Church in Trinidad and Tobago, coming from the Church of Scotland in Trinidad and Tobago, and he was someone who was well embraced, and we're very grateful to have him. Thank you.
Reverend Sieunarine, if I may add to what you were saying there, is it that there was some sense, and any one of the panelists could probably feel this one, is it that there was some sense of exclusion when the schools that were being established were being referred to as the CMI schools, as the Canadian Mission Indian schools? Dr. Tilksing?
Yes, they started off as the CMI schools, and of course the missionaries realized that having Indian on that title projected a certain exclusiveness. So they dropped it. So there was a transition from CMI to CM, Canadian Mission, and then Presbyterian schools. Right. And to add what Reverend Sieunarine was saying, when I studied some of the letters and articles and reports, the composition of these classes in the schools were mixed. So it wasn't just Indo and Afro-Trinidadians. The Chinese man who had a village, who was in the village with a shop, he sent his children to the school. The children of the planter of San Fernando went to Grand School and later on to Naprima Girls High School. And same thing with SAGs. If you study the early days of these primary schools and secondary schools, they didn't take people on the basis of ethnicity. They didn't hire you on the basis of ethnicity. So you actually had some pupil teachers who were Afro-Trinidadian. All right? So they finish Standard 5, Standard 6, and they would be teaching in the schools. So I think that a lot of times when we were looking for arguments, people tend to look at the figures and say, you know what? This school in Guayco had only 2 Afro-Trinidadians. Is it because the school is racist? Right? Or is it because the area is racist? Sometimes it's simply because of location. They didn't have the convenience of travel. So wherever the school was located, you send your children there. I have heard instances where sometimes Afro-Trinidadians wanted to go to the school that their friend, the neighbor, going to. So they went to that school because their friend was there, and they didn't know anybody in the ward schools or the Anglican schools. So sometimes close friendships were forged. And I know you mentioned Reverend Kramer. We have also had Reverend Bailey, Albert Bailey, of mixed descent, in our Presbyterian church too. So we had some people in the past, at the secular and religious level.
And both indeed very, very beloved ministers of our Presbyterian church. Mr. Partap, I want to throw this question for you, sir. I know in your discourse there, from your text, you spoke about in the start of the St. John Presbyterian Church, St. James Presbyterian Church, a very, very wonderful region in Tableland there. And you spoke about the reliance that there was on agriculture, particularly cocoa and coffee you mentioned. And we know that typically in those times we would have referred to those areas as rural. Now, as we have become gradually modernized, rural areas have become a bit of a thing of the past. Would you say that with modernization and that slow deviation from agriculture, would you say that this has impacted upon the persona in the development of your congregation, the sort of passion that they would have had for the church?
Yeah, you're right. The modern day situation in Tableland has resulted in the attendance at the churches, our churches, has decreased. People have moved out. So that, it's not working, yeah, okay. So, right, so that people have moved out, yeah. But there remains a core group of Presbyterians that are there. And it's mixed. Yeah.
Thank you for that, sir. So it's a case more of migration from the region, and maybe we have to do as Dr. Tiloxing emphasized from what you had said.
But if I could, if you give me an opportunity just to link what Mr. Bridgewater had said, there have been two narratives that has been circulating in the country now at this time. One was that the East Indian children who were not given opportunity in the Presbyterian schools. That's one of the narratives that we are hearing. And the second one was that the Presbyterian schools never employed people who were non-Presbyterians. And both narratives are wrong. It's not true at all. In the case of the two schools in Tableland, and this is way back in a number of years ago, there were a number of Hindus, practicing Hindus, who became teachers, and they served in the Presbyterian schools. So, and in fact, they rose to the rank of principals. So it is not correct to say that that the Presbyterian schools, discriminated against non-Presbyterians. But I have a chapter on my book in relation to it.
Available for $150 at the pop-up shop.
$50 goes.
We have a question from Reverend Samner.
Dexter, sorry to disappoint you. It's not a question.
It's not a question.
Some brief snippets here and there in response to the three fine gentlemen. Mr. Paratap, my heart raced when you mentioned bonfire. I have witnessed 3 bonfires in my life. With all due respect to officers of the church, one was right here. And Ashley and I were students. We managed to save a few documents. One was at Susamacha. I happened to be going to sports marching practice, and a big fire going on, and I pull out books for soap. I didn't receive any injury and so on. What is important for us to appreciate is that our people, and I say this very generally, have lost their sense of history.
That is to emphasize your point, Reverend Sam.
How great the fall will be, I suppose. Yes, so we have lost our sense of history. Now, in our church, generally, we have people who have several generations of Presbyterian background. We have people who come on board in recent times, so we could call them first-generation Presbyterians. I am fourth-generation Presbyterian. My daughter is fifth-generation Presbyterian. While I was at Susamacha, I tried to encourage the young ones, especially when I was doing confirmation class, to do your family tree. It didn't happen. Because when you do your family tree, you get a sense of who you are, where you came from, the achievements of your ancestors, and so on. And because of the loss of history, it does affect the work of the archives, because the archives, it's a simple team, and it's what comes to us. You know, we don't have that marketing outreach ability. And I'm very glad moderator and, I thought JS came. So moderator could take this idea, and it still continues, of officers, when they demit office from local board or presbytery, they feel the documents belong to them. It is a crisis in a way. So moderator, maybe somewhere along the line you could put in some policy or practice for these officers when they take office, that they sign a document. When they step down, they have to reckon these are Presbyterian church property and they have to hand it over. Because what happens is bonfire by the family house. No, and the cliche is burn that rubbish. So the archives, we collect rubbish. Figuratively speaking. We should also recognize, we talked about teachers, the work of NAPRIMA Teachers College. It was the only teachers college in South, so we had Catholics, Anglicans, Moravians, Methodists, everybody coming to NTC. So the people who suggest that we were racist is just making trouble. I'm doing some work on a book. I don't want to say much about it now, but when the missionaries started their work, they went to the estates, which means they went to the barracks, and they preached under the mango tree and so on. But difficulties arose when baptism took place. They would accept the message en masse, but when individuals decided to become baptized members of the church, there were suddenly walls going up of mistrust and suspicions and so on. And the thing with alcohol, we need to do a rethink, because what I find happening with our young people are caught up in the culture. And all the alcohol commercials target young people. So it's okay to drink, it's okay to go clubbing, and it's unfortunate that that trend of our background has been lost. And somewhere we must find a way. We talk about what moderation. Fine, okay, but our young people must know something about the dangers of drinking. And I'll just close with one other observation. We talk about church membership declining. And from my little reading and my interpretation of what I read, it didn't start in recent times. It probably started with the exodus of the missionaries. Because the people wanted, forgive my little statement, the white person to do the preaching and the teaching and so on. And the exodus of the missionaries was not an easy time for the church. We talk about the Mayaro documents and those kinds of things. And it seems that was the time the Pentecostal church was also coming to Trinidad and setting up shop. So people migrated to where the white preacher was. This is just my hypothesis, okay? And it's unfortunate. People never gave up their Presbyterian membership, but they preferred to hear a foreign messenger. At that time, too, remember, there were people who said we wouldn't last 6 months. We're going on 45 years, and we'll continue going. So we need to perhaps find a way through Synod, through the college, to get people excited about their history and their Presbyterian roots. And so on. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that, Reverend Samner. And while he gave us those snippets, himself being a wealth of knowledge, we have had some questions coming in. Reverend Sieunarine, are you ready? You're up to bat. The first question here goes to you, and it's from someone who I think is a good friend of yours. Coming from the Armalaya Church, Anthony Sampath, a question for Reverend Sieunarine. Are there still any Presbyterian villages or small, close-knit Presbyterian communities in Trinidad?
Not as far as I'm aware. Christian Village started that way, and there were others like Dr. Tiloxing could amplify this if I'm leaving out any, but the original name for Princestown, for example, was Mission. And that was because of the Presbyterian mission. But then with the visit of the two young princes, it was renamed Princestown. And that began also as a kind of Presbyterian community. But as you yourself had mentioned, with the changes in Trinidad, where no village can ever be described as isolated or sleepy or rural, you also get the change where every village is a plural community in many cases. I've had the privilege recently of being in St. James Church in Tableland, and I was actually very impressed. I know Mr. Partab referred to declining membership, but I thought the church was packed when I was there. And it reflected the variety in the community. There were people of all types there, and you saw that people were choosing this Presbyterian church to attend, not because it's the easiest church name to spell, not because it has the most convenient time for worship, it's 7 in the morning at St. James, or at least it was the day I was there, but because they found that there was something meaningful there. So I think we've shifted away from a time when a Presbyterian community would be like a little enclave gathering in one spot, to a situation where we are a church that's open for everyone.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Reverend Sieunarine. And to add to that, the numbers would have come out because they knew you were coming to preach. This question is for Dr. Tilak Singh. Dr. Tilak Singh, this one comes to us, I believe, from Reverend Sanya Bihari. She's being a little mysterious. I'm getting initials, so I'm interpreting, right? Do you believe our Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago has managed to become decolonized, or are we still trying to become like the missionaries?
I think that's a very good question. And I think that many people in their thinking still have a colonial mentality that when they come on a Sunday, they want to see the minister there. They don't want to see a presiding elder. They don't want to see a lay pastor. They want to see a reverend, and that stems from that colonial era. So I think she is partly correct talking about that decolonization that I think is still occurring. And to add to that, and which is linked to Reverend Summers' point about the foreign messenger, I will tell you that, I have known Presbyterians and other Christians. They would turn on their television not to watch our local people speak. They want to watch maybe Reverend Pastor Hagee, Joel Osteen, and some of these other people. So that point that Reverend Summer brought in about the foreign messenger is so very true. Our grandparents and parents would know people like Billy Graham. So that message coming from abroad ties in with that decolonizing, where, yes, we go on Sunday, but these days, we just want to watch people from abroad on cable TV.
Yes. The foreign faces on us. We also, any of the other panelists who would like to add in the discussion, you can feel free to do so. And friends, we continue to invite you all virtually. If you have any questions, please ensure that you share the questions on the chat. This one is a general question, and I guess that our panelists can tag team for it. I'll read it out for you all. It's coming to us from Mr. Damian Surajbali. We see the missionaries responding to the cry of the marginalized East Indian, but are there any economic or political challenges faced with setting up missions in districts or regions such as Port of Spain, Sangre Grande, and more so San Fernando? And he compares this to the large areas of property given to other churches. I don't know which one of the panel, or if you all will each take a turn on that. We see the missionaries responding to the cry of the marginalized East Indian, but are there any economic or political challenges faced with setting up missions in districts or regions such as Port of Spain, Sangre Grande, and more so San Fernando? There wasn't any more specifics on that question, so maybe how you interpret it, you can.
I'm not sure if I'm answering it correctly because he didn't give a time frame, but I know the presence in Woodbrook. That Woodbrook mission was to serve some of the East Indians from the St. James area. And I know that even though San Fernando had, a variety of other religious denominations, Anglican, Methodist, Baptist, they made sure that they had a presence in South, not just the church in Susmacha, but also Golconda and Retrench, those areas. So that I think they did not allow that economic and political criteria to deter them from spreading those mission stations. So they should not be branded as just focusing on the rural areas and ignoring the urban areas. They saw that the greatest need was in the rural areas, but they also did not ignore those people who were in the urban districts.
I also want to add to that at the time the missionaries came, transport and travel was very different. In the book that Dr. Tilak Singh referred to, the very good book, John Morton of Trinidad, Sarah Morton records how they went from Tunapuna to Sangre Grande, and it took 3 days, and they had to ford 7 rivers. And you think about that, and you imagine them going through jungle and forest. It's amazing. I see our moderator has a question. Mr. Bridgewater had his hand up as well.
Thank you very much. I do like to speak too much, please. So firstly, I want to say I am a living testimony to the graciousness of the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago. Why do I say that? Well, as a little black boy, and I'm not being offensive to anybody, please, by using that descriptor. As a little black boy, I grew up in a cane village, Diamond, on the outskirts of San Fernando. We were separated from Samhan by cane fields. I went to San Fernando Methodist School, my religion, and from there in 1968, 6 years after independence, and 2 years before the Black Power people, I was sitting in Form 1P in Prima College. I didn't look like most of the people I met there, who became lifelong friends of mine. Rex Badaloo and a whole host of them, yeah? And that kind of thing. And I think the Badaloos came from a very distinguished Presbyterian family, yeah? Yeah. So I was speaking therefore to the openness of, and the fact that Presbyterians did not exclude. I was included. I don't know how come, but I ended up there. And I'm very happy about that. While here, I would experience something else. You spoke about the missionaries. At this compound here, we had the Defoot, right? I think they were Canadians. I'm actually going back to my childhood memory now. Right? And one of the sons, he would have been in the school with us, and he blew the trumpet when we had intercall. Run, you run, presentation, run, you run. You hear what Mackenzie said, that's the principle. Play, boys, play. With a piece of rope and a mango tree, well, I can't continue the rest for fear that the moderator puts me out. Right? So that's the kind of thing. And at the third compound here, we also had Naprima Teachers Training College. So I would have seen the various persons, whether Methodist, or whether Afro, whether Indo, Chinese, whatever have you, walking up the steps across in that building. And the other part that really stoked the fire in me and others was a man by the name of Idris Hamid in a little room in the back there. Right? And out of that milieu of things came, for me, again, I'm going back at the Caribbean Council of Churches with Keith Cadet and all those persons, very, I would say, fervent period of Presbyterianism, such that Dr. Roy Nihol would go on to become president of the World Council of Churches, another Presbyterian. So that's a glorious contribution for me of the Presbyterian Church. And that's why I say am a living testimony of, the word escapes me now, of Presbyterian giving into the society. One other thing I would want to say, marginalization. So we spoke to the marginalization of the Indo community in the context of colonial Trinidad. But I want to say it was not only the Indo and so on, but also Afro. They too were marginalized because it was the planter class that dominated the society. My MA, for example, speaks about landlessness amongst Africans, myth or reality, 1838 to 1900. And the considerable difficulties that these people had to manifest their emancipation through some economic independence, as in land tenure, such that the planter class and the British legislature would pass laws, for example, about squatting. So if they decided to squat, they could be imprisoned. Then they say, all right, no, we'll make lands available to them. And they say no. They have to buy lands at 100 acres. And those fellas in C.L.R. James' book, Black Jacobins, C.L.R. said the fella had to be a Napoleon of finance in order to purchase that land. You know, and I just thought I'd see and share with you my experience vis-a-vis Naparima and the Presbyterian Church. And we used to get good food in the cafe, not the cafe, where they had the kitchen. Oh yes, as boys, we enjoyed that tremendously. Thank you.
Indeed, we are always glad to hear about the good food as well. This question to the panel from George Sami. Moderator, you had a question? Sorry about that. No? You?
Thank you, Mr. Bridgewater, for your testimony. All those online, and thank you very much, esteemed panel, for your very informative presentations. Comment and a question. One, I think that Dr. Tilak Singh hit the nail on its head as a reminder that part of our history, which we cannot forget, is that the missionaries were part of it, and we have to accept that. And perhaps we have to juxtapose faith, F-A-I-T-H, with fate. That was our fate, and it is our faith. And we accept this, and sometimes we do a disservice to the memories of the missionary. They were by no means perfect, but it was part of our history. And now the question, which will move from that stage, the missionary stage, to now we now have become the missionaries, because so many people have migrated to North America and Europe, especially Canada. And we may have to consider, as we move from the past to the present to the future, about the whole concept of mission rebound and mission reverse, where we create now that not just ecumenical interfaith experience, but how do we help those of us who have migrated now to where the Canadian missionaries, from where they came, how we share culture. And that's what's happening now in Canada. I mean, my husband is Canadian. And when you go to the churches in Canada, steel pan, lots of wonderful experience where the Canadians are now learning from our own persons who have migrated. And that's a wonderful experience of mission rebound and mission reverse. So I think hopefully when we are doing the future, that maybe if we can consider that part of our contribution now to the Canadian society. And you know what? They so much appreciate what our people have to offer. So much. And last, while Mr. Bridgewater was talking, and I think a question came from someone, is it, can't remember the gentleman. Do you know, as part of the restructuring document in 2002, missionary restructuring process, the Boundaries Commission at that time was instructed to develop and actually evangelize and set up churches in Laventille, Morva, and Digo Martin. And Well, it fell at the side for a little bit because, we are in maintenance mode since 50 years ago. So when you're in maintenance mode, we don't go further to evangelize and so on. Not to indoctrinate, but to share that wonderful, beautiful interfaith ecumenical experience, working together. And the Anglicans and the Catholics were willing to work. And I guess we have to also consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And we realize how often that word evangelism is coming to us, making it part of our personal credo as we go forward. Two more questions to our panelists, right? We know that you all are probably a little bit exhausted by now. This one is from George Sammy, and he indicates, Reverend York indicated that when the Canadian missionaries took over the Irie Church, there was still a small Afro-Trinidadian congregation. Out of the fear that indentured laborers would not worship together, the missionaries handed over that congregation to the Anglican Church. Is this historical fact? And if so, how could we or should we have done better?
Dexter, I am not sure where that history came from, but it's new history. I don't know if it's a revisionist interpretation. I have not seen that in black and white. Right? Maybe it was passed on from fourth and fifth generations. But what I do know is that was an era in which the membership did not have this race consciousness. And I'll tell you something that draws on what Mr. Bridgewater said, and that is there was a certain solidarity and camaraderie and friendship because the enemy was the planter. And the deep ethnic and racial and religious divisions that we have today, we did not have that in the colonial era. The village life, the urban life was different. And I think that we need to bear that in mind. So to talk about Africans in Irie Village and the American missionaries and this fear of having Indians there, I think that would be exaggerating the history or distorting it. Because I know for a fact that, they were genuinely interested in hearing about the gospel.
Thanks very much for that, Dr. Tilak Singh. I don't know if any of the panelists...
I just want to add something when he mentioned that the planter was the one at the center of everyone's lives and kind of the focus of dislike. The moderator and I are on a panel with the Church of Scotland in Scotland dealing with legacies of slavery. And I've been learning a lot about the legacy of slavery in Trinidad. And recently we've been talking, for example, about the Lamont family, who owned a lot of the land that's right now Palm East, and they also own part of Diego Martin. And at one point, the Lamont family, Mr. and Mrs. Lamont, visited the then CM school at Canaan, and they didn't like the worship. They did not like what was going on. And Mr. Lamont brought in his wife to force the children to learn the national anthem of the British Empire because he was astonished that the missionaries were not teaching that. They were just focused on the Bible and other things. And Lamont wrote letters about it, which is how we know about this. And you see in that letter, first of all, I don't know why the missionaries weren't teaching God Save the King, which is what it was at the time. But you see in that letter that kind of tension. You also see the reference to the fact that Canaan School, they welcomed everybody, and they had that emphasis on the Bible and morality and enlightening everyone. And this planter came in and would later return to the United Kingdom and get massive compensation, a lot of money. He was the one who was kind of trying to undermine the work of everybody, the work of education. He was trying to introduce his plantocracy values, saying, we have to make these people good citizens of the British Empire. And that was his language, and he was very uncomfortable. So I wondered if the missionaries were, in fact, trying to create, even from then, an indigenous sense of national identity in these people. So I think that's what we see coming across in, as Dr. Tilak Singh said, in what we have in black and white.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Reverend Sieunarine. And our final question for the evening, I think this might probably even set the stage for day 2. It comes to us from Ms. Rowena Watley. In order to build our church through evangelism, do you think that we must explore the dire need for psychological support to young persons and their parents, and to provide this support? Along the lines of sociology there, so.
I think that's an excellent question for us to reflect on, because coming out of this pandemic, we see so many parents being retrenched, unemployed. We see the children having difficulty to transition to classes. So I think the church has to draw on its support, find out if its members are psychologists, psychiatrists, and they need counseling. Maybe the church could introduce special counseling sessions in the schools. I would like to see a counselor maybe in every district, every primary school, every secondary school. Maybe this could happen by 2025. So it is a very good question by Rowena to look at that psychological support, because many of these children, not just in Presbyterian schools, but other schools, they face bullying, they face verbal abuse from teachers, emotional abuse from their peers. It's very difficult when these children are coming from single-parent homes, when they're coming from homes where their parents are abroad and they're staying with grandparents. So they look for this attention at school. So I think the breakdown that we see in our education system, including the Presbyterian schools, I think it's an excellent question where we need to start trying to help our students. A lot of times when people hear Presbyterian schools, they look at scholarships, CSEC and CAPE results. We win the President's Gold Medal and we beat our chest. But within the schools, the boys and girls have a lot of problems. Sometimes it's covered up a little bit, doesn't reach public. But we need to deal with this, because a boy in Form 6 who wants to experiment with alcohol or smoking, where's the counselor? Where's the social worker? Where's the support? The dean of discipline could only do so much. So I think it's very important that that psychological support be put on the agenda for the Presbyterian Primary and Secondary Board of Education.
Thank you indeed very much for that. And that brings us to the end of our questions. I am certain that if there are any other questions, maybe sometimes people are shy on the spur of the moment, those questions can be forwarded to the Theological College and they can get some answers from this very, very esteemed panel leading us. I think they deserve a true lusty round of applause. So I've been told that I am also multitasking today because I have been given the honor of doing the vote of thanks. So first of all, of course, we want to thank our moderator, the Right Reverend Joy Abdul Mohan, for launching this very, very special event, the first of the virtual research series by our Theological College. And we want to thank the distinguished guests for their physical presence and virtual presence, the support today, but especially our 3 panelists, Dr. Jerome Tiloksing, Mr. Harry Partap, and Reverend Adrian Sieunarine. Indeed. We want to thank the Virtual Research Series team that have made this possible as their brainchild, so to speak. Reverend Adrian Sieunarine, our principal of SATC, Kimberly Ramkisoon, secretary at SATC, or virtual managers of our live stream chats, handling the questions from the audience, Reverend Sanya Bihari and student minister Jessica Mahadeo. We thank our acting chair of the board of directors, Ms. Murella Sambucharan, and knowing fully well that the organizing team was ably assisted by the board secretary, Ms. John, we thank our technical support, MKS, for the audio recording and live streaming, as well as the sponsors for the technical and logistical costs. Mentioned here, we have Susulans, as well as some well-wishers of the St. Andrew's Theological College who wish to remain anonymous. We also want to thank the Synod of the Presbyterian Church of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have both the moderator and we have our General Secretary, Mr. Terence Ward, here, for their support of the event, especially for ensuring that that drive and that enthusiasm was kept to ensure that today went off as successfully as it did, and the days to follow. We are looking forward to these. A reminder to you all that copies of publications by our presenters, as well as the Advent booklet, are on sale at the pop-up shop at the back, and we ask you to be sure to return for day 2 and day 3, where the much anticipated calendar of 2023 will be made available. I was told before we have our closing prayer that Ms. Sambucharan has some words. She's now going to do her feature address.
Yes, because I like to talk, I have to just add a few more comments. I do want to acknowledge, I know we are not seeing the persons who are online, but we had at one point 42 persons joining us online, and we are very proud of that. I want to acknowledge ministers of the PCTT who have joined us, members of our board of directors who joined us virtually, church workers, elders, and other well-wishers who joined and engaged in our online audience. I do want to acknowledge the presence of the Vice Chair of the SATC Alumni Association, Ms. Soleil. Welcome. You are right here at the chapel, so the online audience would not know that. So this is a really proud time for the SATC, not only because of this evening and the days to come, but also because several past students of the St. Andrew's Theological College mobilized themselves, and they formed the first iteration of the SATC Alumni Association, and I think that deserves a round of applause. Oh, the chairperson is here as well, I'm sorry. So thank you all very much for getting together and mobilizing yourselves. So we do have an alumni association. Anyone who did a course at SATC or a program of study, we encourage you to join that association, and I'm sure they will be reaching out to you all. So as James 1 verse 17 says, every good and perfect thing is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights. So before I re-invite Dexter to close us in prayer, I do want to take the opportunity to thank 5 very important persons this evening, without whom today's evening of research would not be possible. So I want to start off, and I'm going to invite our corporate secretary, Mr. Sankasingh, to just join me to the front here to engage in a little presentation time. And Reverend Jim, if you might join us also to the front. I want to thank you on behalf of the board of directors. So you can stand to the middle there. Chris could tell us where we should be standing, and Mr. Sankasingh will tell us, right, so Chris will just tell us where to stand. Anywhere. Chris said anywhere. Great. Yes, so Reverend Jim, thank you very much for gracing us with your presence, for being our honored guest at our first evening of research, and for launching this first ever research series. We are extremely grateful to you, and may God continue to bless you richly as you continue to ministry. Welcome. And Mr. Sankasingh, you have a few more to do, so I want to invite Dr. Tilak Singh at this point. And Dr. Tilak Singh, if you would just stand so Mr. Sankasingh can make a small presentation to you. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your time, and for challenging us particularly to push forward to the future. We are very grateful to you. Mr. Partap. On behalf of the board of directors, I do want to thank you for your very insightful, for your well-documented presentation about one of our local churches. I think this particular presentation also challenged us in a different way to organize our records, to document properly, and to pass on those documents to future generations so that we can have our own records of history. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sankar Singh. And at this point, I want to invite Mr. Ramkisoon, our treasurer, to please just make 2 more presentations on behalf of the Board of Directors. And this one goes to you, Principal, Reverend Adrian Sieunarine. So when this idea was brought to Reverend Sieunarine, he welcomed it, and he worked assiduously to get it done. And to make matters a little more interesting, the team asked him to present on the first research evening. So we want to thank you for sharing your published work with us on Christian Village, and more so for being the guinea pig on the first day as you accepted the challenge of presenting. Thank you very much. And we have one more presentation, and I thank Mr. Ramkisoon for holding on, and that goes to our very dynamic, let me get my hands up, dynamic, engaging, and articulate host, Mr. Dexter Rampersad. Thank you for agreeing to be the panel discussant this evening. You directed the flow of our first research evening and excellently engaged our virtual and live audience. Thank you also for adhering to my list of instructions and for adding your personal flair. The board and the SATC are extremely grateful to you. Thank you. And I now hand back to Dexter to close us in prayer.
Moderator, I am a bit jealous. Not the fact that your basket looks bigger than mine, but I have been all evening calling you the Right Reverend Joy Abdul-Mon, and she comes up here and says Rev J. You know, Rev J. Perks, you know. Perks. Friends, let's unite our hearts in prayer. Eternal God, our creator, our comforter, our caregiver, we thank you for this time that we have spent together. We pray that you would bless those that have been part of the blessings provided through this discourse and deliberation, that we would use all of these lessons to draw us closer to your heart. May we be mindful of the world around us and the needs of our neighbors, while being aware of this rich legacy that has been bequeathed to us by those who may have toiled in the church's historical vineyard. We ask, dear God, that you pour forth your blessing upon us, you renew and refresh us for our mission, making us effective leaders and wise stewards of your bountiful gifts. We ask, dear God, that you bless the refreshment that we will share, a sign of your goodness to us, that you will bless those who have prepared it and those who serve it, and keep us ever mindful of those who go hungry this night. Bless each of us with your love and mercy, so that we may continue to serve in your most precious and holy name. Amen. Just a little reminder of the
Rate these music. D music.